I don't know if you'll find this, but people who complain about how stupid everybody is, they're usually not the smart one in the room. You know what I mean? If you think everybody around you is stupid, then the problem is probably with you. Either it's true that everybody is stupid, but you are hanging out in a place where all the stupid people are, or you don't know what you don't know. Remember me talking about this. In other words, sometimes the people who are the smartest don't think everybody around them is stupid because they have the perspective of understanding that people around them don't know. They have the perspective of understanding that the people around them know things that they don't. People who are really stupid don't have an ability to understand that everybody around them knows stuff that they don't know. If you follow. So if you're a person who thinks, oh my God, everyone around me is dumb, either it's true, and then the problem is with you because you're hanging out in a place where stupid people are, or it's not true. In fact, you're the stupid one because you don't understand that the people around you are not stupid. In other words, you have to have a degree of intelligence to know that people around you know things that you don't know. So perspective is a really important thing. So I was telling him that it isn't, he was complaining about how his girlfriend just doesn't think critically about things. And he's giving me a series of examples. And I was pointing out to him that you wouldn't, unless you've ever been taught to think critically, you would never know to do it. Like, for example, if everybody around you kind of says, the sky is blue or whatever, so the sky is orange or whatever, it may never even occur to you to look up at the sky and say, it's not orange, it's blue. In other words, if everybody around you shares a certain opinion, it would never even occur to you to question it. Like, we think of questioning opinions as a really basic thing, but it's really not. It's really not, because our understandings are formed by our social experiences and by our social relationships. And so the idea of thinking, and especially challenging ideas, is really not natural to us. I'm thinking about, for example, a friend of mine when I lived in Los Angeles. She was really pretty. She competed in beauty pageants and stuff like that. She was like Miss LA or something like that. And she would talk to me all the time about how helpful police officers were, because she was a terrible driver. She would get pulled over all the time, and she would never get a ticket. And she would just tell me, police are so nice. Oh my God, I was speeding. I even realized I was speeding because I was listening to this song, and she told me she found herself doing 90 miles an hour in a 65. She got pulled over. The cop came up to the window, told her what she was doing, ran her license and registration, everything, came back and just told her, hey, you gotta be more careful. You're speeding and you could really get hurt, and let her go with a warning, no ticket. It happens to her all the time. Why do you suppose she gets pulled over and is let go all the time without getting a ticket? Because she's pretty. When I mentioned that to her, I said, well, that's because you're very beautiful. And she's like, no, it's not. That's just, I've always had that experience with cops. They've always been very helpful. And she's like, and my friends too. Of course, she had attractive friends. That formed her worldview. It never even occurred to her that cops would be harassing, that cops would be arrogant, that cops, even that cops wouldn't be those things, but that cops would just be professional. And if you're speeding doing 90 and a 65, you would get a ticket. To her, that just didn't make any sense. And when you try talking to her about it, she just couldn't see it. And then one time she got a ticket, and she was speeding, and the difference though was that she got pulled over by a female officer. Female officer just, wrote her up for what she was doing, and she was so angry, and she was angry about it for like a week. And she was just like this bitch, and she was just this, and she was like so impersonal, and she just came up and just told me what I was doing, gave me his ticket. In other words, the officer didn't try to chop it up with her, just let her, just gave her the ticket and sent her on her way. But to her, that was a horrible thing, and I told her, you just get a little bit of perspective about what the rest of Los Angeles goes through, and she just didn't believe that was the case. And so her whole worldview was formed by those experiences that she had. So to tell her that police would be anything other than that, you could tell her all day. Like, you could show her data all day to show her that that's not how they were on a general basis. but she would never be able to get her head around it because it was so contrary to what she had experienced. And and a lot of times you'll encounter these discussions with people who will say, oh, the world is like this, but then you'll show them data that says that's completely just not accurate. I mean, I was thinking back, I was talking to a class a few weeks ago, and I was talking about, like, for example, COVID. Can you guess, like, what percentage of people who got COVID died from COVID? 65%. Now, some people will say, that's not right. The actual data, about half of 1%, 0.5% of people who got COVID died from COVID. Go read the data. That's what it says. Now, having said that, people will say, that's no way. My grandmother died from it, and my aunt as well. Go look at the data. That's what the data says now. About 0.5%. It's a little bit hard. It's a little bit higher than the flu. Right? But now knowing that, people will still reject that and say, there's no way. That thing was crazy. It was going nuts for so long. It wasn't the illness that was going nuts. It was our reaction to the illness that was going nuts. And because we talked about it so much and we spread all this misinformation about it, now because people live through that, people experience that, it's almost impossible now to get people, even if you show them the data, people will say, oh, the data's wrong. And that's because when we first started talking about the numbers of people who died from COVID, we conflated, we put together the idea of people who died from it and people who died with it. So for example, a good friend of mine, his son overdosed on heroin over in Las Vegas. His room was just covered with needles. It's a trippy story, but I'll leave it for another time. His son, when he overdosed, they did an autopsy on him, and in his blood was he had COVID. He's listed as somebody who died with COVID. You see the difference? There's a difference between dying with COVID, in other words, it was in your system, and dying from it. It was the cause of your death. A friend of mine, she has a friend whose son was shot and killed. He had COVID in his system. Hey, where's my son?
Yeah.
Bring him back.
No.
Bring him back.
No.
She stole my cat, dude. Yeah, I had this little kitty someone brought. She stole my cat, dude. And now the cat pees on her bed, and I'm like, that's what you get for stealing my cat. She's like, oh my God, he's so terrible. He's this little demon. I go, yeah, of course, because you kidnapped him and he hates you. I hope he craps in her shoes later. So a friend of mine, her friend's son was shot and killed. They did an autopsy, which is strange to me. Cause of death is pretty obvious, but they do an autopsy and he has COVID in his system. He's listed officially as someone who died with COVID. In other words, they took people who died with COVID, people who died from COVID, put them together. And that's why we were hearing that the death rates were so high. Now, if you separate those numbers out, which we've done now, the people who actually died because of COVID, in other words, that was their cause of death, it's very low. And in fact, the number of people who are under 18 who died from it, I want to say it's like 6 in the whole world. Literally 6 in the whole world, a single-digit number. But if you listen to reports at the time, it was like people believing 65%, totally reasonable. People would believe that. The point is just that when you get hit with something if you get hit with something that's true, that completely contradicts what you're living through, there's this like dissonance that's there. There's this tension that's there. That's like, but that's not what I'm living. That's not what I'm seeing. But a lot of times, what we're seeing is shaded by what it is that we're perceiving by our experience. So, when he says the neurotic person, the person who's mentally ill, is not the voluntary happy seeker of truth. In other words, when a person who's mentally ill, the way that you discover that you're mentally ill is not because you go out and you start seeking truth and you go, hey, wait a second, this is interesting. I'm depressed. I just noticed this. Instead, it's quite the opposite. You go through life and you're depressed and you're anxious and you might not even know that you're those things. Like you might be aware that's your experience, but it isn't until you talk to other people that you find out like, wait, the way I'm feeling is different from the way that everybody else is feeling? Like, not everybody goes through this thing that I'm going through. Like, I mean, if you think about, there might be some things in your life that you have like feelings, or you have, I don't know, interests that other people just think are so weird or strange or odd or deviant even. And you're like, oh, like, no, not everybody thinks this way. And a lot of times you'll find that the way that you think is pretty similar to the way that a lot of people think. But there are little areas of your life that you might think completely different from everybody else. And how do you find out that you think differently from everybody else? Well, you hear other people talk about a subject. Now, it might very well be that people are just saying what everybody else is saying, even though they don't actually believe it. And then you might kind of start saying the same thing everybody else is saying just to kind of go along with everybody else. Or it very well might be the case that everybody does believe something. Like, for example, going back to the COVID thing. I had a student who, when we came back from it, who just said, this is all bullshit. I remember this because it was one of my videos. There was an argument between my students in my class, and the YouTube channel where I post is actually got a strike because of the discussion that the students were having. I wasn't even saying it, but it was just because the students were talking about it that the algorithms, the AI algorithms, just picked it up and just gave me a strike for it. But the student was just saying, it's bullshit, I don't believe it. And then everybody was just like dogpiling on this guy, and he was just explaining why he thought what he thought. And it's one of those rare times I actually left everything in the video and uploaded it. Afterwards, several students came up to me and asked me, what do you think about that, about the conversation? I go, I don't know, what do you guys think? And a bunch of students were telling me they agreed with that guy, but they just didn't say anything because they didn't want to stand out. They wanted other people to attack them. And so I said, well, then it sounds like you should wonder then how many people actually believe the things that so many of us say, and how many of us just kind of go along with it. But that's one of the ways that you find out that your views are different from everybody else's, because you hear other people spread their views. Mental illness is kind of like this. You're forced to discover that you're mentally ill because you find out that not everybody has trouble getting out of bed in the morning. Not everybody is anxious. Not everybody is stressed out all the time. It seems like everybody else has their things together, so you discover through your experiences that you're different from everybody else. And it's not that you're happy to find out. I mean, very few people go, well, that's not true, I guess, but in a sane society, most people don't walk around and go, wow, I'm depressed. This is great. I mean, I understand that today some people like to indulge in that because it makes them feel like they belong if they do have some kind of a mental illness. But I'm saying, like, in a sane society with sane people, we don't really like to go around and brag about how much mental illness we have, how depressed we are, how anxious we are, how suicidal we are. Of course, I mean, again, you down online, you do get followers, but in a sane society. But instead, you discover it. You're unhappy to find out that you are these things. In other words, you don't discover that you're depressed because you're reading a book, and then you discover it, and then you're like, wow, I found some truth. It's because you live it. But that's the first step to getting over it, is discovering it. Once you discover it, well, then you can start to overcome it. So, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Neato.